Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this ETA Inside News that, as you know, we bring out every Friday right after our newsletter. And you can follow our newsletters either in you can sign up for our database and we send it to you, or you can follow our newsletters here in LinkedIn and you will see that we have one in English and one in Spanish each week. And this week is English, so welcome. You can see all our news. We'll leave a link below so that you can take a look at them. And I want to talk to you today about agrovoltaics, which is a very, very hot issue right now, or a very hot topic rather, in the industry. And for me, my job is actually to follow all of these really interesting things that are happening in the renewable energy and decarbonization industry. And that is definitely one of my favorite things. And I like to look into whether agrovoltaics are a genius idea or is just a greenwashing exercise. So let's start with what is agrovoltaics. I think the name is very, very clear. Is putting together agribusiness, so whatever is farmland, like the growth of crops, with PV in the same area. So it uses the same land essentially. You may have heard it referred as agri PV sometimes or agrivoltaics. I don't think there is a very clear nomenclature on what is the right name for it. So because it's something that is still up and coming, there is a lot of names used around. For now, I'm going to use agrovoltaics. And essentially, there is two ways to look at it, really. On the one hand, it could be that just like an agribusiness is looking to become more green, to lower their CO2 emissions, by using green electricity for their farm activities. That could be one way to look at it, but they don't want to give up some of their land to just have a PV project. That could be an agrovoltaic project. And another could be a situation where actually a PV project decides that, to use the space also in a hybrid approach for growing crops on the side. What is interesting here is you have to be looking at each business model separately because each business model is completely unique. And it will depend on what your objectives. Are you mainly dedicating it to farmland with a little bit of solar on the side, or are you mainly doing solar generation with a little bit of farm on the side, right? So they would be 50-50 approach, 60-40, 70-30s, etc. Each of them at the moment, they tend to be on the small side. We haven't seen really large projects, although slowly, I think according to the Fraunhofer, there are 2.0 gigawatts of agrovoltaic projects, but those are mainly in smaller exploitations. This is around the world, right? So it is a trend that is growing, really. What is interesting to me is that everyone is right now asking me, we do a little bit of content on agrovoltaics, but it's still pretty new, but there is a lot of interest. So what is this main interest? What is it driven for? Is it something that is here to stay? Is this agrovoltaic trend here to stay, or is it just going to be, a little bit popular for a while and then it will be 3-4 projects and that's it? Let's look first into what it takes to do an agrovoltaics project. Of course, you have the situation where it's a very one and only, one of a kind business model that you may or may have to go, may or may not have to go to the bank for, and you may have a very complicated time of actually building a bankability case. Providing or how you are looking at this exploitation of this specific project. In technical terms, the differences in an agrovoltaic project that I can see is that the PV panels, of course, need to be much higher, because what you want to do is you want to create sort of like two levels. And on the ground level, you're having your crops, and on top you have the PV panel. So oftentimes you see like a height of at least 2.5 meters, which means that you have to be building a structure around those 2.5 meters. You may have to measure very carefully for the wind loads and everything that goes behind it. You have to think about all your VOS and how it's going to have to go above, because what you don't want to do is on the ground have either anything that may get in the way of the growth of the crops, but also on all of the maintenance that has to be done to grow those crops. So the crops have to be tended to through their lifetime. So this is something to be considered in there. How are you going to make sure that the generation doesn't get into the way, doesn't get dirty because of the agribusiness movements around. So there's it's a bunch of things that need to be considered. There is also the shadowing. So you have to make sure that some solar does get through to the crops, of course, and that the solar resources are somewhat shared. Therefore, they have to be separated. The rows of panels have to be separated more in order to allow and the sunlight literally to come down through to feed the crops. So this is something to be considered. You want it high, you want the height to be larger, you want the shadowing to be to not to be avoided, if you like. So you need to separate them more. That means more cables, that needs a little bit more spread in terms of how the plant is. It's not unsurmountable. None of those issues are like issues that you cannot overcome. Of course they can be overcome, but you need to be thinking about all of these things from the get-go. And you need to think also, what are the crops that you're going to be planting in this area? Because they have to be crops that perhaps require less sunlight, that do well with less sunlight, less tending to, because each time that you pass machinery, equipment, tractors, you may be producing a lot of dust that goes onto the panel. So there is kind of like a give and take. You need to be thinking about this as a unit. How is it going to work? Because naturally, if you are raising the PV plant, what is obvious is that you're also going to have to undertake maintenance and operation jobs a little bit higher up, and you need to be thinking when you're going to do it and how you're going to do it for that too. Even though as PV projects, once they're going, they don't really take a lot of maintenance, they don't take a lot of hands-on maintenance, but still you need to have the ability to do all those things. So there are things to be considered. That is from the technical side. There's also the part that I think bifaciality would be really hard. So bifacial panels is not that they're a no-go. In fact, certain crops could be amazing for bifaciality, but the calculations are going to be hard because the crops are constantly changing. Therefore, the albedo, as they're growing, is constantly changing too. So a lot of further calculations are needed to make sure that we understand, how that affects the bifaciality coefficient and how that affects, therefore, the generation of the project. So to me, it seems like at the moment we don't know enough. That is one of the things that I'd say. Um, it makes total sense for agribusiness to go for PV if they can in this way, because we know that agribusiness are also a huge component on CO2 emissions. I mean, they actually make the food that we eat, so it's important what they do. But as long as we can actually start them reducing the CO2 that they emit, that'll be amazing, for everyone. So that is a good way to go about it. But then also at the same time, any other projects that could be used for like land sharing, I get that in some countries, especially that may not have so much land, it may be very important, but we need to be thinking whether this is a good idea from the perspective of all of the increased work, that is undeniably going to make a little bit more expensive the generation, both of the food and of the electricity. Although at the same time, in the same land, it could be a very, very opportune business case. Um, what I do know, though, which is I think something that is very, very important, is at the moment there is so much NIMBYism, which means not in my backyard. People locally are opposing so much the use of land for PV projects. They say, it's food as agriculture. It's hard to compete. When you have the situation where a landowner maybe uh, rent out the land for a uh, generation of energy, rent out the land for food. This competition is really not good. So this could be a way for PV generation to find a middle ground where maybe less local opposition is possible, where we work with the community in order to make sure, that we're doing things in a sustainable fashion. Um, this could be definitely a way. Already in Spain, in France, in Germany, there are a lot of people that are growing with a lot of they oppose PV projects because they take up too much land, because they don't leave necessarily local benefits. In Spain we're seeing like a lot of opposition, especially in certain areas. So perhaps this is a way to mitigate a little bit that. Longer term, though, I am not clear right now whether this is a trend that is here to stay. I still doubt at times. It does increase the difficulty of everything that we do. The larger the plant, the harder it could be, to have all of those items. If it's a smaller, I see it a little bit more clearly. But we are going to follow this trend, because the truth is that also sometimes when local opposition may be the one thing that make a project break and not be allowed to go on. And at the moment, most of Europe is going to be building PV like there is no tomorrow. We're going to see growth of PV. For example, in the case of Spain, we're going to have 30 gigawatts plus in the next few years, and then up until 2030. So this land and all of this development has to come somewhere, and if local opposition starts, it's just going to delay us. So this may be a way, through agrovoltaics, to break through that middle and actually get to our end goal of building this much. So we'll keep on watching this, and thank you very much for your attention. We'll see you next week, and in the meanwhile, don't forget to read all of the other news pieces in the newsletter. Thank you very much.